democracy from the next Trump. Miles Taylor joins me now. Miles, good to see you again. Thank you for being with us this evening.
Hey, Ali, great to be with you.
You write in your book that regardless of who the next Republican president is, they are likely to exist in the same mold as Donald Trump. That's the warning that you're issuing, that not just to be worried about Donald Trump, who has taken every opportunity in the last week to tell us about what he'll do if he comes back, and it's all about revenge and retribution, but you're worried that it goes far beyond that to other candidates.
Much farther, Ali, and I spent 2 years trying to map this out, not just in my name, but by talking to senior Republicans in Congress, former Republicans, senior Trump administration officials that I served with from the cabinet level, all the way down to people who sat outside of the Oval Office. And the big takeaway, Ali, was that the GOP has become very authoritarian curious, if you will, and that it's not just Donald Trump that's been flirting with fascism. A lot of these other candidates in the race with him have actually taken Trumpism further than Donald Trump did. They've taken policies that Trump himself rejected and implemented them, like Ron DeSantis with using migrants as pawns and flying them around the United States. Greg Abbott's done the same thing. Similarly, we've seen that, Trump's fringe talking point about witch hunts inside the FBI and the need to cleanse that building become a mainstream talking point. So Trumpism has really grown beyond his control. And you said the operative words, Ali, vengeance and retribution. Yeah. Donald Trump sounds like he's auditioning for a bad Batman movie, but that language has been embraced by the wider Republican Party.
Which is wild, because 40 years ago it would have been difficult, if not impossible, to conceive of a Republican Party that was not built in the mold of Ronald Reagan. What happens now? I mean, how does Trumpism live to become the rest of the Republican Party, or does something happen that stops this movement? And maybe that something is losing another election.
Well, first, I think folks need a wake-up call about how serious it is. I mean, the whole point of writing this down in Blowback was to try to map out the playbook of persecution that they want to put in place. And by they, I mean the broader MAGA movement, Trump's allies here in Washington, who want to support whoever the Republican candidate is and staff their administration. And some of the anecdotes that these senior Trump officials gave me are shocking. I mean, there's playbooks for how to start using the levers of government to spy on political rivals, to deploy DHS forces into Democratic cities to intimidate the political opposition, to appoint special counsels to prosecute Democratic politicians and left-leaning organizations. I mean, this is very systematic weaponization of the federal government with the most thin legal veneer of validity that they can put on top of it to justify what they are doing. It's enormously alarming. And I don't think Donald Trump is the only one who would implement that playbook. In fact, we have seen, again, most of the candidates in this field try to out-Trump Trump. And by the way, Ali, we have a base of the Republican Party that's increasingly been radicalized toward the MAGA movement, that whoever wins the nomination, they're going to have to cater to that base.
So we've got three that I can think of, Will Hurd, Chris Christie, Asa Hutchinson, who are trying to do what they can to not have Donald Trump elected. I think collectively they come up to low single digits. Most of those who are not trying to out-Trump Trump in the race are trying to have it both ways. They're trying to have their cake and eat it, too, which doesn't strike me like a moment for that. It strikes me that there are people like you, former Republicans and conservatives, who might be won over if the party starts to look like something that it used to be.
Wouldn't it be shocking, Ali, if people spoke up and actually had a spine about what we're witnessing in our democracy? Before the commercial break, you played a couple of clips of people who were sort of astounded that I criticized the president from within the administration. It was Paul Ryan, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, and Kellyanne Conway. Three people who I've heard in person behind closed doors viciously condemn the ex-president of the United States. Why are they remaining silent? Now, I've said this all week, and it's going to sound deeply ironic coming from me, but I think the biggest threat to our democracy is anonymity. Are these people who refuse to attach their names to the criticism. I learned that the hard way. If I have one regret, it's that I didn't come forward sooner, because when I did, I realized it made it easier for other people to come forward. Those three people I just named have a responsibility to tell people how they actually feel and to stop misrepresenting their opinions about the danger that Donald Trump and his allies pose to our republic.
What happens post-Trump? I had a very disturbing conversation a few minutes ago with Ann Applebaum, who said that once you get power, you don't become nicer. You don't become more magnanimous. If you get your power by becoming authoritarian, you actually just keep on doing it.
Well, Ann's probably one of the best scholars of this in the world, and what I'm sure Ann would emphasize is if we go back to, let's say, the rise of Nazi Germany in World War II, one of the lessons that we learned from scholars like Friedrich Hayek is that once a regime takes power that is, I'll use that term again, authoritarian curious, what you tend to see is that the worst rise to the top. You don't have public officials that come in with expertise and character. You tend to have flatterers that come in and enablers that want to fall over themselves to say yes to the leader. And in the end, that's why you get the worst rising to the top. Well, when it comes to the administration of the federal government, the American people don't want dangerous political ideologues dispersing their Social Security checks and deciding whether or not they get emergency relief if a tornado hits their home. But unfortunately, that's what we have on tap if we make this same civic mistake and we put a hyper-populist back in the White House.
How risky do you think that is right now? We're a long time out to be predicting, but polls indicate it's closer than many Americans would like to think.
Yeah, earlier in the program, Ali, you laid out the prosecution timeline of all of the cases against Donald Trump. Despite that, despite the headwinds from the justice system and so many cases, it would be my guess that Donald Trump does end up being the nominee for the Republican Party. And I hate to say it, I actually think he has a very good chance of winning the presidency. In fact, right now, the betting markets have him at 3 times the odds he had before.